The Joint Chiefs wanted to end the Korean War with atomic bombs until Eisenhower said these 8 words that changed everything. Pentagon War Room, Washington, D.C., April 28, 1953. 2:15 p.m. The mahogany conference table is surrounded by the most powerful military minds in America, maps of Korea spread across every surface, red pins marking Chinese positions, blue pins showing Allied forces trapped in a bloody stalemate that has consumed American lives for 3 years. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and the weight of decisions that could reshape the world. President Dwight D. Eisenhower sits at the head of the table, his face a mask of controlled tension. At 62, he carries the experience of commanding history's largest military operation, D-Day, ends. But Korea is different. This isn't a clear enemy with defined objectives. This is a proxy war against Communist China and the Soviet Union, fought on terrain that devours armies and political capital with equal brutality. Across from him, the Joint Chiefs of Staff present their unified recommendation with the cold precision of men who measure success in strategic objectives achieved, not lives lost. Chairman Admiral Arthur Radford, Air Force Chief Nathan Twining, Army Chief Matthew Ridgway, and Navy Chief Robert Carney, 4 men whose combined military experience spans 2 world wars and who now advocate for the most catastrophic escalation in human history. The statistics they present are stark and undeniable. American casualties in Korea, 142,000 and climbing. Chinese forces, estimated 780,000 troops with unlimited reinforcement capacity from mainland China. The front line has barely moved in 18 months. Every day of continued conventional warfare costs more American lives while achieving nothing measurable. The American public's support for the war erodes with each casualty report. Congressional pressure mounts for either decisive victory or complete withdrawal. Admiral Radford speaks first, his voice carrying the authority of a man who has commanded fleets in the Pacific Theater. Mr. President, conventional warfare in Korea has reached a strategic dead end. Chinese human wave tactics neutralize our technological advantages. Their willingness to accept massive casualties makes traditional military pressure ineffective. Air Force Chief Twining slides aerial reconnaissance photographs across the table. Black and white images showing Chinese supply lines stretching from Manchuria into North Korea, bridges, railways, ammunition depots, troop concentrations. Sir, we have identified 17 strategic targets in mainland China whose destruction would cripple Chinese military capability in Korea. Our atomic arsenal can eliminate these targets simultaneously, ending Chinese involvement within 72 hours. The photographs show industrial complexes, military bases, transportation hubs. What they don't show are the millions of Chinese civilians living near these targets. What they don't quantify is the global consequence of America becoming the first nation to use nuclear weapons in anger since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. General Ridgway, the ground commander who knows Korean terrain better than anyone in the room, presents the tactical analysis. Mr. President, Chinese forces in Korea operate from sanctuary bases in Manchuria. They attack our positions, then retreat across the Yalu River, where we cannot pursue. It's an impossible military situation. We're fighting an enemy we're forbidden to defeat. The frustration in Ridgway's voice reflects the sentiment of every American commander in Korea. Rules of engagement that prohibit attacks on Chinese soil create a military impossibility, winning a war against an enemy you cannot fully engage. Navy Chief Carney provides the strategic context. Sir, Soviet involvement remains limited because they fear direct confrontation with American nuclear capability. If we demonstrate willingness to use atomic weapons against Chinese targets, Soviet support for Chinese operations will cease immediately. They won't risk nuclear war over Korea. This is exactly when the room's atmosphere changed, because what came next would either end the war in days or start World War III. Admiral Radford presents the Joint Chiefs' formal recommendation, reading from a prepared document that represents weeks of strategic analysis and unanimous military consensus. President, the Joint Chiefs unanimously recommend immediate atomic strikes against Chinese military targets in Manchuria. Operation Hudson Harbor has been refined to minimize civilian casualties while maximizing strategic impact. 17 targets, 12 weapons, delivered simultaneously to prevent Chinese countermeasures. The plan is comprehensive, detailed, and terrifying in its scope. Strategic bombers would penetrate Chinese airspace at dawn, delivering atomic weapons to ammunition depots, air bases, supply centers, and troop concentrations. Follow-up conventional strikes would destroy damaged infrastructure, cutting Chinese supply lines permanently. Within a week, Chinese forces in Korea would be isolated, undersupplied, and vulnerable to decisive Allied offensive operations. Mr. President, Radford continues, this represents our professional military judgment. Continued conventional operations in Korea will result in indefinite stalemate with mounting American casualties. Atomic strikes offer the only realistic path to decisive victory and acceptable resolution of the Korean conflict. The silence that follows lasts exactly 43 seconds. Eisenhower studies the photographs, the maps, the casualty projections. His mind processes the strategic logic, the tactical advantages, the political benefits of ending America's first military stalemate through decisive technological superiority. But something else weighs on his consciousness. The memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the knowledge of what atomic weapons actually do to human beings, the recognition that crossing this threshold would fundamentally alter America's relationship with the world. You haven't seen the real decision yet, because Eisenhower's response would redefine American military strategy for the next 7 decades. Eisenhower stands slowly, his hands flat on the conference table, looking directly into the eyes of each Joint Chief. When he speaks, his voice carries the authority of the Supreme Allied Commander who liberated Europe, but also the wisdom of a leader who understands that some victories cost more than defeat. Gentlemen, I've listened to your analysis. Your strategic logic is sound. Your tactical planning is thorough. Your professional competence is unquestionable. He pauses, letting his words settle. But you're recommending that America become the first nation since 1945 to use atomic weapons in warfare. That decision changes everything. Not just about this war, but about America's role in the world. General Ridgway interjects. Sir, with respect, atomic weapons are military tools. We use them to end World War II. Using them to end the Korean stalemate serves the same strategic purpose to saving American lives through decisive action. Matthew Eisenhower responds, using Ridgway's first name to signal both respect and disagreement. Atomic weapons ended World War II against an enemy that had attacked us directly, bombed our territory, killed our civilians. China hasn't attacked the American mainland. Chinese forces are fighting in Korea, not California. Air Force Chief Twining presses the argument. Mr. President, Chinese intervention in Korea constitutes an act of war against United Nations forces under American command. We have legal justification for military action against Chinese territory. Wait a minute. Don't miss this crucial distinction. Eisenhower's strategic mind grasps something the Joint Chiefs haven't fully considered. Nathan, there's a difference between legal justification and strategic wisdom. Yes, we can justify atomic strikes against China. The question is whether we should, and what happens next. Eisenhower moves to the wall map showing global communist and Western spheres of influence. If we use atomic weapons against Chinese targets, what prevents the Soviets from using atomic weapons against our European allies? What prevents future conflicts from escalating immediately to nuclear exchange? The room falls silent as the implications sink in. The Joint Chiefs have focused on winning the Korean War. Eisenhower is considering the precedent that atomic strikes would establish for every future international conflict. Admiral Radford attempts one final argument. Mr. President, Soviet nuclear capabilities are limited compared to ours. They won't risk nuclear war over Chinese interests. This is our window of nuclear superiority. We should use it while we can. You won't believe what Eisenhower said next, but these 8 words would prevent nuclear war and redefine American strategy. Eisenhower turns from the map, looks directly at Admiral Radford, and delivers his decision with absolute finality. We will not be the butchers of Asia. 8 words. 30 seconds of silence. The moment when America chose restraint over nuclear dominance, but Eisenhower isn't finished. His rejection of atomic strikes comes with an alternative strategy that the Joint Chiefs hadn't considered: political warfare combined with conventional military pressure designed to achieve victory without crossing the nuclear threshold. Gentlemen, Here's what we're going to do instead. Eisenhower moves back to the conference table, his demeanor shifting from moral leader to strategic commander. We're going to end the Korean War through negotiation backed by credible threat of escalation, not through actual escalation. The alternative strategy Eisenhower outlines is complex, subtle, and ultimately more effective than atomic strikes would have been. Instead of bombing China, America would demonstrate nuclear capability through highly publicized weapons tests. Instead of attacking Chinese territory, American forces would be reinforced with atomic-capable artillery and aircraft, creating ambiguity about American intentions. We'll let the Chinese and Soviets know that we have the capability and willingness to use atomic weapons, but we'll give them face-saving opportunities to withdraw from Korea voluntarily. Negotiation from a position of strength, not demonstration of strength through destruction. The psychological warfare component of Eisenhower's strategy is particularly sophisticated. American intelligence would leak information about atomic weapons being positioned in Korea, creating uncertainty about American red lines without actually crossing them. Chinese leadership would face pressure to end the war before American patience ran out, but they could frame withdrawal as strategic repositioning rather than defeat. What you've seen so far was just the beginning, because Eisenhower's refusal to use nuclear weapons in Korea would establish the doctrine that prevented atomic warfare for the next 70 years. General Ridgway raises the obvious concern. Mr. President, what if the Chinese call our bluff? What if they increase pressure in Korea, knowing we won't use atomic weapons? Then we'll have learned something important about Chinese strategic thinking and will adjust accordingly. But Matthew, consider this. If we use atomic weapons against China and the war continues, what's our next escalation? If atomic strikes don't end Chinese resistance, do we bomb Chinese cities? Do we accept Soviet nuclear retaliation against our allies? The escalation ladder leads to places we don't want to go. Air Force Chief Twining presses for clarity. Sir, are you categorically ruling out atomic weapons in Korea? Eisenhower's response reveals the sophisticated strategic thinking that would characterize his presidency. I'm ruling out first use of atomic weapons as an offensive tool to break the Korean stalemate. I'm not ruling out retaliatory use if Chinese or Soviet forces employ atomic weapons first. The distinction matters. We maintain nuclear deterrence while avoiding nuclear precedent. The meeting continues for another 90 minutes as Eisenhower outlines the specific implementation of his alternative strategy: increased conventional forces in Korea, enhanced air power short of strategic bombing, diplomatic initiatives through neutral countries, economic pressure on Chinese trade. Just when everything seemed decided, Admiral Radford made one final attempt. Mr. President, I must register the Joint Chiefs' formal disagreement with this decision. Our professional military judgment is that conventional operations in Korea cannot achieve decisive victory. American casualties will continue indefinitely. Eisenhower's response reveals the heavy burden of command and the loneliness of ultimate responsibility. Arthur, I understand your position. I respect your professional judgment, but I'm not just the commander-in-chief of American military forces, as I'm responsible for America's moral leadership in the world. The decision to use atomic weapons in Korea would be irreversible. Once we cross that threshold, we can't go back. The irony of Eisenhower's decision becomes clear in the following months. His refusal to use atomic weapons actually strengthens American negotiating position in Korea. Chinese and Soviet leadership, uncertain about American intentions, become more willing to engage in armistice negotiations. The ambiguity about American nuclear doctrine creates more strategic pressure than actual nuclear use would have generated. This time the real shock came 6 months later, when Chinese forces began withdrawing from advanced positions in Korea, not because of atomic strikes, but because of the psychological pressure created by American nuclear capability held in reserve. The Korean Armistice Agreement is signed on July 27, 1953, 3 months after Eisenhower's refusal to authorize atomic strikes against China. The war ends not through nuclear devastation, but through negotiated settlement that preserves face for all parties while achieving American strategic objectives. But the most remarkable consequences of Eisenhower's 8-word decision emerge over the following decades. Dr. Henry Kissinger, writing in his memoirs 20 years later, observed Eisenhower's refusal to use atomic weapons in Korea established the precedent that nuclear weapons are tools of deterrence, not instruments of warfighting. This distinction shaped American strategic doctrine through the Cold War and prevented nuclear escalation in subsequent conflicts. Soviet archives, declassified after the Cold War's end, reveal that Stalin's successors were prepared to respond to American atomic strikes in Korea with nuclear attacks on American allies in Europe. Eisenhower's restraint prevented not just nuclear warfare in Asia, but potential nuclear devastation across multiple continents. Chinese leadership, according to documents released in the 1990s, interpreted American nuclear restraint as evidence of strategic wisdom rather than weakness. This perception facilitated later diplomatic initiatives, including Nixon's opening to China in 1972. Most significantly, every American president since 1953 has followed what became known as the Eisenhower Doctrine, nuclear weapons as instruments of deterrence rather than tools of active warfare. The 8 words spoken in a Pentagon conference room established the precedent that prevented atomic warfare for 7 decades. The Korean War's final casualty statistics underscore the wisdom of Eisenhower's decision. Total American military deaths, 36,574. Chinese military casualties, estimated 400,000. These numbers, tragic as they are, pale compared to the millions who would have died in nuclear exchange between superpowers. When asked about his Korean War decisions in a 1965 interview, Eisenhower reflected, "The easy choice would have been to use our atomic advantage while we had it. The right choice was to establish that America's strength comes not from our willingness to destroy, but from our ability to build and protect. Sometimes the greatest victory is the war you don't fight." That's how nuclear warfare was prevented. Not through treaties or summits or diplomatic agreements, but through one man's 8-word decision in a Pentagon conference room. Dwight D. Eisenhower's refusal to become the butchers of Asia established the precedent that nuclear weapons are too terrible to use, too powerful to ignore, and too important to deploy casually. The Joint Chiefs who advocated atomic strikes against China were brilliant military strategists applying conventional logic to unconventional weapons. Eisenhower was the statesman who recognized that nuclear weapons required fundamentally different strategic thinking, that their greatest power lies in never being used. So when you face moments where the easy solution involves escalation, where overwhelming force seems like the quickest path to victory, where superior capabilities tempt you to impose your will through dominance, what do you choose? Maximum force or maximum restraint? Immediate victory or long-term wisdom? Destruction or deterrence? Because sometimes the greatest power is the power you choose not to use. Sometimes the strongest response is the response that leaves room for your opponents to retreat with dignity. And sometimes the most decisive victory is the victory that prevents anyone from having to lose. Eisenhower understood this. That's why on April 28, 1953, 8 words prevented nuclear war and established the doctrine that has kept civilization from atomic destruction for 70 years. We will not be the butchers of Asia. And until now, most people never knew how close we came to nuclear warfare in Korea, or how one man's moral clarity in 30 seconds changed the course of human history.